So now since we have understood what are skill gaps and what are the primary reasons why these skill gaps get created, so let's now look into the ways by which we can manage and address these skill gaps. So let's look at those three scenarios one by one. First is, how do we address unplanned absenteeism? So firstly, it is important to understand that through this approach, we are not talking about reducing absenteeism rates, but of increasing the proportion of planned absenteeism, which is important from skill gap management perspective. That is not to say that the reduction of absenteeism rate is not beneficial or not required. It is very much required. And if the rate of absenteeism is higher than whatever is normal in that particular industrial cluster, then the reasons are an overall employee satisfaction. And the tool to achieve that is an effective grievance redressal system and effective management of the employees for their health and safety, for their mental well-being, for their incentive structures, and the overall working environment and the culture of the organization. There is a separate course available on that particular subject, and you may want to go through that for more details. So when we talk about how do we how do we increase the number of planned absenteeism among the total absenteeism that happens in the factory, so it is important to understand that this is essentially a matter of culture change. So as we discussed earlier, absenteeism is normal, whether it's announced or unannounced. That absenteeism is part of organization culture. So while absenteeism is normal, the amount of the announced absenteeism or unannounced absenteeism, this is however part of organizational culture. Many managers we come across who blame it on individuals and habits, and they say that, well, it's a habit of people to just not tell in advance that they are not going to be present, and there are some individuals who have a habit of telling that. Yes, but what we also observe is that within the same industry culture, within the same industry cluster, different companies have different rates of announced and unannounced absenteeism. And there are factories where you have the rates of announced absenteeism as high as 90%. So this proves that there is a very strong element of factory culture in it, and it is not just about the habits of individuals. So it is very much possible to have more than 80% of absenteeism which is prior informed. How do we achieve that? There are multiple ways to do that, but one of the easiest tool to reduce the number of unplanned absenteeism is to have a policy of permitted leaves by each line and section. Why do we say line or section? Why do we not say at the factory level? And the reason for that is because it is important to keep this at an operational unit level and not just at a factory level or the aggregate level. The factory may have, say, 400 or 500 employees or maybe even higher, and having a policy for whole factory would not help in management of the line operations for each line supervisor or for the production manager. So it is very important that the policies are designed for each operating line or a section so that they are at the granular level. And if a line, for example, has 20 operators or 40 operators, then have a policy that n number of employees can take a day paid leave every week, right? So this would help the employees to not only know that this is something which is available, they will also be able to prioritize and improve the overall culture of informed leaves. So that is one way, but while it may take some time for that culture change to happen, there are more things that companies can do. So the another tool that companies can use is to have some kind of early warning system. What do we mean by early warning system? Now, most of the companies have biometric or RFID based attendance systems, or some have manual registers, so whatever it is, but primarily it is that your attendance is registered in the factory. And these are generally placed within the factory premises, and hence any absenteeism is known only when the employees don't show up. Now that results in certain amount of time getting wasted in the beginning of the production process in the early hours of the day. By putting these or additional attendance systems in hostels or buses, because most of the factories have a lot of their employees who stay in hostels, or they send these buses to collect the employees from the neighboring villages. And by putting these kind of additional attendance systems in these hostels or buses can provide anywhere from half an hour to 1 hour advance notification of the daily expected attendance. There could still be minor variance in that, but still you will be able to know with reasonable accuracy, reasonable high level of accuracy, what is the expected daily attendance for each day. And this could be used for planning little bit in advance, so that it can prevent the loss of time in the morning when the work is just starting. And these attendance systems could also be linked with the employee allocation of lines to visualize the gaps which are expected today, and how exactly the planning should happen of these particular gaps, either by way of floaters or through multi-skilled operators, whatever is the primary policy that the factory uses. So in management of the skill gap because of absenteeism, what we saw was, okay, one of the ways and one of the important factor is that we should have better visibility on the absenteeism, and hence how can we increase the rate of planned absenteeism or informed absenteeism among the workforce by bringing culture change, by bringing some kind of early warning systems and other things. So that is there, but still we need to figure out how exactly do we manage that. Now, most of the factories have some mechanism in place, one way or the other, and there are several factories that employ floaters, or some of them call them jokers, or some of them call them jumpers, who will manage the skill gap created from such kind of absenteeism in different lines. And there are some other factories which will use some of their multi-skilled operators to come and cover up by working on more than one lines, but then that has sort of a efficiency loss somewhere and the production loss somewhere. Now, let's assume that we are talking about the floaters, to plan for the floaters to manage for the skill gap that is created because of absenteeism. So there are a few important points to be noted over here. The first most important point is how many floaters should one plan for? Now, to come to that number, the one rule of thumb is to plan the number of floaters as the minimum absenteeism rate of the factory. What do we mean by that? In most of the factories, absenteeism will be a range. So it will be a range anywhere from, let's say, 6% to 10%, which is what we see a lot more industry wide. But in some factories, it could be higher. It could be 8% to 12% or 10% to 15%. So whatever that range is for each particular factory, the number of floaters that should be planned for should be as a rule of thumb, the lower end of that particular range. So assuming the industry scenario of, let's say, between 6% to 10%, if that is the absenteeism rate, then the number of floaters that can be planned for is the 6% of the total required workforce. The second decision point with regard to floaters is the identification of who should be the floater within the workforce. For this, it is important to be reminded what is the primary purpose of a floater. Because in many factories, there is the question that is asked by managers is that should my highest skilled operator should be a floater, or should be the most multi-skilled operator should be the floater. So who should be the floater? So first, it is important to remember why do we need floaters? We need floaters so that we ensure that production does not get disrupted and they are able to take place of any operator which is absent today. And hence the floaters need to be identified as operators who are multi-skilled much more than the very high skill in a particular operation. And they should be able to act as a filler for any of the absent operator which has created that particular skill gap. How do we identify that? So one of the tools that can be used for identification of floaters would be skill matrix. And the selection criteria could be to look for multiple skills, and as we discussed earlier, not necessarily for the highest skill proficiency. The third important decision factor is that what should be the efficiency expectation from the floaters. Now, since floaters have to be multi-skilled operators, it is not possible for them to be highly skilled in each operation, because if they are practicing the same skill again and again all the time, then they will reach very high level of operating efficiency in that. But if they have to move from one type of operation to another type of operation on a continuous basis, then it is very difficult for them to achieve the highest efficiency, and even if they achieve, it is possible that they might lose that highest efficiency. So it is not possible for the floaters to have highly skilled in each of the operations that they are performing, and that is also not what is expected or desired from them. So if a floater is replacing a skilled operator, a highly skilled operator as a filler, it will bring down the overall efficiency of that particular operation and hence of that particular line. So floaters cannot be equal replacement of a high skilled or a A grade operator. But what is important is that the efficiency expectation should be kept as an average whenever floaters are deployed in a replacement for any absent employee.